We've got another one of our freight features and an expert on the CPG supply chain coming up next. Mike Baudendistel, host of the Stockout, writer of the Stockout newsletter as well. Mike, welcome to FreightWaves Now.
Thank you. It's good to see you guys.
Good to see you as well. Tell us a little bit about what we're talking about today. Your newsletter comes out this week. We've got your show coming up on Friday. What are you covering this week?
Yeah, so just put out a newsletter this morning and went through a few of the items from the Biden administration executive order to increase competition. They put together 72 basically initiatives over all these different agencies. And I try to go through it and say, well, does this mean anything at all for CPG companies? And so I highlight a few things I thought, could have some, direct impact if they gain traction with some of those agencies. So I talked about the railroad industry, which, some CPG, some of the less time sensitive items that go further, do go over the rails. And I talked about how, one of the orders is for the Surface Transportation Board to take a hard look at reciprocal switching, which is a way for, shippers to solicit competing quotes on another railroad when there's one railroad that's basically captive to that particular shipper. Also has them take a look at the acquisitions and have a very high bar that any acquisitions in the rail industry have to be in the public's interest. And then they talked about providing rights of way to passenger rail over freight rail, which could be a negative thing for service. And then in maritime, making adjustments to demurrage and detention. And then in the stuff in the meat industry, I thought was interesting also, where the meat industry, they are talking about how the meat processors have too much market power over the ranchers and cattle farmers that are delivering those animals to the meat processors, and want to try to inject more balance there. And then in agriculture, they want the owners of equipment to be able to repair those pieces of equipment, just like the thing about the cell phone, where they want consumers to be able to have the right to do DIY projects to repair cell phones instead of buying new ones. And so all these things, I think, are designed to increase competition, which I think is on balance, I think, a good thing for CPG companies, because CPG companies already compete in very competitive marketplaces, and so there's nothing that is anti-competitive about what they're doing. Even if you think about CPG products that have a very high market share, like Heinz ketchup, it's still very competitive with competing products.
And so it's really interesting to see the team coverage that's coming out of the story, right? Because we were talking
Yeah,
about it touching on really every single aspect of
sure.
transportation that we cover. Do you have any plans to kind of network with our other writers here at FreightWaves and kind of come up with this team coverage covering this executive order?
Yeah, so I referenced both Joanna Marsh's article and John Gallagher's article, who both wrote those things up pretty well. I think the one that was probably most related to my area of expertise is Joanna's comments on the rail industry, and I think sort of going forward, I mean, she's done a good job of covering the Canadian National acquisition of Kansas City Southern, which is pending, which does have a very high regulatory bar to meet. But I don't think that acquisition is a done deal, or at
Mm.
least there will be mitigation measures in place that CN will have to comply with.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, Mike, good morning, by the way, sir. Sticking on that just because it was is really interesting to me, the forced switching, and there is some reciprocal switching that goes on right now, but the forced switching, I had to look it up to figure out what it was, because I've not run a railroad before. I have brokered loads on rail and dealt with the rail, but not to the extent that I know that it takes 8 trains and 3 switch yards and 4 and all these different things to do a single switch. Can you speak to that, and how that is of benefit, or can be a deterrent, or be something, a negative to the CPG?
Yeah, so basically, the railroads hate it. The shippers could potentially like it, because the main idea is, if a shipper can only use one railroad to move in a particular area, the railroad has all the power, right? It's a monopoly. But if there's a second railroad that can interchange, over that captive rail line, then could solicit in theory, at least solicit a competing offer from that other railroad. Now, that other railroad is still going to have to pay for trackage rights and rights to use facilities and those type of things. But the idea is it could be good for a big shipper that could potentially play one railroad off of another. So that's sort of the idea. I mean, there's very different types of switching depending on how the facilities are laid out and so forth. But it's an idea that the railroads have too much power because the industry is so concentrated, particularly in certain corridors where there may only be one railroad, and so the administration wants to increase competition in the railroad industry.
Going to be interesting things to watch there. Mike, give us a little bit of a sneak peek. What's coming on your show, The Stockout, this Friday?
Sure. Well, starting to go through earnings, and Pepsi reported this morning had a great quarter. It seems like they're benefiting from people getting out more of their higher margin products, or a lot of those single serving beverages that you buy at maybe a convenience store or gas station. So those are doing really well. And there was some question of whether people would stop snacking when they got out a little bit more. They seem to still be snacking. So Pepsi seems to be pretty much firing on all cylinders. And then also saw ConAgra, they didn't have such a great quarter. Their shares are down. I think maybe their brands are maybe a little bit stale. So I can dig into some of those earnings reports.
And confirm we are still snacking.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, Mike, for joining us this morning. Make sure that you go read his newsletter and then catch the Stockout Friday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV.